Hi, and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to start a series of book reviews that I want to talk about. The first of three. Three books, two of which have been published within this past year, last year 2018, is currently February 2019, and one book that was published in summer of 2017. All three of these books have personally given me a lot of insight and allowed me to make sense of a lot of the cultural and political upheavals that have occurred in the past 5 years since I'd say about 2014 or so, but really starting in 2015. And the first of these three books that I am going to do a review on is titled The Coddling of the American Mind, How Good Intentions and Bad Ideas Are Setting Up a Generation for Failure by Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt. This book was expanded upon an article written in 2015 that was the same theme. It followed a series of events that occurred at a couple universities, particularly Yale University, or it actually might have been published a little bit before that. But it was really about sort of a change on college campuses that's revolved around things like shutting down speakers and so forth. And Jonathan Haidt is a social psychologist at New York University in the business school teaches ethics in the business school. And Greg Lukianoff is president of FIRE, the Freedom of Individual Rights in Education. Since I myself am a community college professor, I am particularly interested in a lot of the topics that are brought up in this book. Now, the title of the book might rub people the wrong way because it sounds a little bit like, intergenerational, the older generation talking about how the young kids these days are soft or whatever, but it's really not like that at all. It is approached from both from a place of sensitivity, I think, as well as true intellectual rigor, I'd say. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about what the book starts off as. So there's an introduction titled The Search of Wisdom, which puts kind of you in a sort of a fictitious ancient Greek world of. The first chapter talks about some of the things that have been happening over the past couple of years from 2015 to 2017. The tumultuous years. It talks about, kind of introduces about the events that triggered the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, to protests that have occurred at the University of Missouri and Yale in fall of 2015, protests that have never been seen before. And then, of course, continuing on to 2016, or late 2015 into 2016, with many terrorist attacks both in Europe and in the United States and Middle East, of course, and then in the U.S. with what happened in San Bernardino, what happened in Orlando, both ISIS-inspired as well as the larger mass shooting in Las Vegas, and then of course with the 2016 election of Donald Trump, as well as continuing on to 2017 of more campus protests that occurred at University of California, Berkeley, where there was a riot that started after the shutting down Milo Yiannopoulos, and then some events that happened in Middlebury, and then of course what happened at Charlottesville. So there's a lot going on. So he talks a little bit about that as a preface. But the whole book goes into how young people that were born after 1995, not even really millennials anymore, but what Haidt calls iGen, and how the rise of safetyism played a role in producing a generation that has had a hard time with certain things. So these three, he starts off the first part of the book talking about three untruths. The untruth of fragility: what doesn't kill you makes you weaker. This can be summed up as folk wisdom and prepare the child for the road, not the road for the child. And the second great untruth is always trust your feelings. There's a saying by Buddha that says, your worst enemy cannot harm you as much as your own thoughts unguarded. But once mastered, no one can help you as much, not even your father or mother. And the third, the untruth of us versus them, that life is a battle between good people and evil people. And what is corrected here is a line from Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who wrote the Gulag Archipelago, that the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. But it basically goes into a number of different things. You could really read about this all online. Google Brett Weinstein and Evergreen State College. Google Middlebury and Charles. Google Middlebury protest but the first one was really started. This all was the Halloween controversy at Yale, where an administrator basically kind of downplayed the insensitivity of ethnic Halloween costumes and suggested to the students that this is not something that administration should step in. Okay, but these are all things that could be seen online if you haven't heard about them. But he also kind of talks about how did we get here. That's like part 3. And part 3 talks about the polarization cycle. Haidt talks about how that's up until the 90s, the fact that the greatest generation, the generation that fought in World War II and struggled during the Great Depression as young people in the 1930s and 40s, were basically still like the senior leaders running the country, even into the 90s, early 90s at least. But then they started to retire and pass away. And their formation early on was formed by having to work together to save the world from tyranny and fascism, etc. But also starting with cable news, and there was a lot more atomization of the media. That's a big one. And then, of course, with the advent of the internet and then social media, really allow people to live in truly parallel worlds. The end of the Cold War was another big thing that sort of triggered kind of a political polarization. So basically, he talks a lot about the polarization cycle and how about young people today, born after 95 especially, have been brought up in this world. Then the book goes into talking about changes in parenting. You know, there's been a lot of talk about helicopter parenting and how there's a decline of free play, how play is structured, and about how there were a few high-profile kidnappings and murders back in the early 80s, which triggered a very big change in parenting of not letting children play outside on their own, not letting children work out their problems amongst each other on their own, which meant that they were always dependent on an authority figure, and that might be why, part of the reason why that the young kids today who are in college in the last few years really want authority to crack down on anything that might make them feel unsafe. But also the influence of social media, because those born in 1995 and later, Haidt argues, as well as others argue, is truly the point where young people truly grew up with social media and smartphones, because in 2006, Facebook allowed everyone to have a profile, and so that basically means that, and then maybe even took a couple years for everyone to have that, or almost everyone. So basically, that means by the age of 13, those are the formative years, that means that they grew up with the social media where there was a lot more cyberbullying. So the idea that words can be dangerous is something that, again, previous generations didn't really think, but now much are so. So it's a really great book, and it is not, I think Haidt is actually not at all disrespectful to the younger generation. He said there's a lot of good things. There's actually been a big decline in risky behavior, whether it's drinking, smoking, drugs, sex, things like that, but also not getting a license until later, driving. So it's basically kind of ties in generational change and understanding what has been going on college campuses. And then he basically, part 4 is titled Wising Up, and talks about how to have wiser kids, basically introducing free play, removing any laws that were previously made that would get parents in trouble for letting their kids out to play. Haidt talks about how he lets his daughter or children that are in their maybe 10 to 13, forgot how old they are, to go to the store in Manhattan, New York, and to go get something, but they're still on, they still have a cell phone, but allows them to realize that the world is not as dangerous as sometimes the media might make it out to be. And so that's Wiser Kids. Wiser Universities is to, talking about how, obviously we want to make everyone feel safe and welcoming and inclusive, but at the same time, if we believe that words are violence, then that would limit the free, the intellectual debate. So I talked about the University of Chicago is one university that has really took the forefront of against the whole safe space movement. And then Wiser Societies is really about how to kind of depolarize the politics today. And about some different things that can be done to reverse some of the political polarization. For example, one thing, in the mid-90s, Newt Gingrich at the time, the Speaker of the House, made a law saying that shortened the work week, so therefore for Congress people. That way they didn't have to live in Washington and interact with each other. So these things can be reversed. So that's a little bit about, again, the coddling of the American mind, how good intentions and bad ideas are setting up a generation for failure, by Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt. Check it out. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Cheers.